Christmas morning, 2024. 7 excited children tearing into beautifully wrapped presents under a massive tree, their squeals of joy filling the room. But there's an 8th child sitting quietly in the circle, watching, waiting with empty hands. That child was my son, Ethan. I'm Maya Rodriguez, and what I'm about to share with you changed everything I thought I knew about family, forgiveness, and the incredible wisdom that can come from the heart of an 8-year-old boy. My husband Blake and I had been married for 2 years, trying to blend our lives with his tight-knit Thompson family. His sister Chloe always seemed to run the show at family gatherings, organizing every detail with the precision of a military operation. There were Frank and Diane, Blake's parents, who had raised 3 successful children and took pride in their close family bonds. Then there was Blake's brother Owen with his twin boys Noah and Liam, both 6 years old and full of energy. Chloe had 3 children of her own: 9-year-old Lily, who was artistic and thoughtful; 7-year-old Mason, who never met a sport he didn't love; and 5-year-old Grace, the family princess who could charm anyone with her bright smile. And then there was Ethan, my son from my previous relationship. Quiet, observant, mature beyond his 8 years. He had this way of watching people, really seeing them, understanding things that most adults missed. Blake treated him well, but Ethan had never felt comfortable calling him Dad. He was cautious with affection, having learned early that not everyone who enters your life stays. I had spent weeks preparing for this Christmas, determined to prove that Ethan and I belonged in this family. I bought thoughtful, expensive gifts for every single person, especially the children. I wanted this to be perfect. I wanted them to see us as more than just additions to their family tree. But as I watched my son sit there, the only child without a present, while his Aunt Chloe distributed gifts to everyone else with theatrical enthusiasm, I felt my chest tighten with a mixture of rage and heartbreak that every mother knows. The room had gone uncomfortably quiet when I asked about Ethan's gifts, and Chloe's response still echoes in my mind. "Oh, we ran out. I guess we miscounted this year. Sorry, Ethan." What happened next left everyone in that room completely speechless, including me. Because sometimes the person you least expect to have the answers, the one who should be hurting the most, becomes the teacher that everyone desperately needs. Let me take you back to how we got to that Christmas morning, because understanding our journey makes what happened next even more powerful. When I first met Blake 3 years ago at a coffee shop downtown, I wasn't looking for love. I was a single mother focused entirely on giving Ethan the best life I could manage on my marketing manager salary. Ethan was 5 then, still asking when his biological father might come back, still flinching slightly when strangers got too close. We had our routine, our little bubble of safety, and I wasn't sure I wanted to risk disrupting that. But Blake was different. Patient. He never pushed Ethan to warm up to him, never tried to be the instant father figure. Instead, he'd sit on our living room floor building Lego sets while Ethan watched from the hallway, slowly inching closer each visit, until one day he was sitting right there helping Blake find the right pieces. It took 8 months before Ethan would let Blake read him a bedtime story, and even longer before he'd accept a goodnight hug. When Blake proposed, Ethan was the first person he asked for permission, not in some cutesy, performative way, but in a real conversation between 2 people who both loved me. Ethan had looked at him seriously and said, "Will you promise not to leave us?" Blake's eyes had filled with tears as he promised, and I knew this man understood the weight of what he was taking on. The wedding was small, intimate, just our closest friends and Blake's family. That was my first real introduction to the Thompson clan dynamics. Chloe had insisted on planning everything, down to the flowers and the seating chart. She meant well, I told myself, but there were little comments that stung. "Maya, I hope you don't mind, but we've always done family photos a certain way." Oh, that tradition might be confusing for Ethan since he's not used to how we do things. Each comment was wrapped in sweetness, but the message was clear. We were newcomers who needed to learn their ways. Frank and Diane were warmer, but I could see them watching Ethan carefully, trying to figure out where he fit in their established family structure. They had 7 grandchildren who shared their DNA, who had grown up together, who knew all the inside jokes and family stories. Ethan was polite, quiet, observing everything with those wise 8-year-old eyes. The first year was the hardest, Every family gathering felt like a test I wasn't sure how to pass. Thanksgiving dinner, where Chloe mentioned 3 times how the kids usually sat at a separate table. But maybe we should make an exception for Ethan since he was still adjusting. Easter egg hunts where all the cousins had designated areas to search, but nobody had thought to assign one to Ethan until Blake stepped in. Birthday parties where gift exchanges were perfectly choreographed among children who had known each other their whole lives, while Ethan stood slightly apart, always polite, never complaining. I started overcompensating. I bought more expensive gifts than I could afford, volunteered to bring 3 side dishes to every potluck, offered to help with every family event planning. I wanted them to see that we added value to their family, that we weren't just taking up space or disrupting their perfect dynamic. Blake tried to bridge the gap, but he had his own complicated relationship with confrontation. He loved his family fiercely, but he'd always been the peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts rather than addressing them head-on. When I'd mention feeling excluded, he'd say things like, "They just need time to adjust," or, "You know how Chloe is with change." He meant well, but I felt like I was fighting for acceptance alone. Ethan never complained, which somehow made it worse. He'd come home from family gatherings and go straight to his room to read or build with his Legos. When I'd ask if he had fun, he'd nod and say it was fine, but I could see in his eyes that he felt the difference in how he was treated. He was too young to understand the subtle dynamics, but old enough to sense that he didn't quite belong the way the other children did. As Christmas 2024 approached, I was determined to make it different. I spent 2 months planning, shopping, wrapping gifts that I hoped would show how much thought I'd put into each person. I bought Lily an expensive art set because I'd noticed her drawing during family dinners. Mason got a remote control car that I'd researched for weeks to find the perfect one. Grace received a princess dress-up kit that I knew she'd been wanting. Even the twins got matching superhero costumes that I'd ordered custom-made. I had convinced myself that this Christmas would be our breakthrough moment, the day the Thompson family would finally see Ethan and me as truly belonging. I should have known that belonging isn't something you can buy or earn through perfect gift-giving. I should have realized that the person who would teach us all about family wouldn't be an adult trying to prove their worth, but a child who already understood what the rest of us had forgotten. Christmas morning arrived with that crisp December air that makes everything feel magical, and I woke up with butterflies in my stomach. This was going to be our year. I had wrapped every gift with meticulous care, double-checked my list to make sure I hadn't forgotten anyone, and even brought homemade cinnamon rolls that I'd gotten up at 5 a.m. to bake fresh. We drove to Frank and Diane's house with the car packed full of presents, Ethan quiet in the back seat as he usually was before big family gatherings. "You excited, buddy?" Blake asked, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Ethan nodded, but I caught his reflection and saw that familiar, guarded expression he wore when he wasn't sure what to expect. The house was already buzzing with activity when we arrived. Chloe had outdone herself with decorations, garland everywhere, perfectly coordinated ornaments, and a tree so massive it nearly touched the 12-foot ceiling. The other kids were practically vibrating with excitement, running around in their Christmas pajamas, while the adults sipped coffee and admired Chloe's handiwork. "Maya, Blake, perfect timing," Chloe announced, clipboard in hand like she was directing a Broadway production. "I've got the whole morning planned out. Kids, everyone needs to sit in the circle for present time. I've organized everything by age and family unit to make sure it flows smoothly." I watched as she arranged the children in a perfect circle on the living room carpet. Lily, Mason, and Grace sat together, whispering excitedly about what they hoped to find under the tree. Noah and Liam bounced impatiently next to each other, their energy barely contained. Ethan took his place in the circle, sitting cross-legged and straight-backed, hands folded in his lap like he was preparing for a formal ceremony. The adults gathered around with their coffee mugs and phones ready to capture every moment. Frank had his expensive camera out, Diane was arranging herself for the best view, and Owen was already recording video on his phone. I positioned myself where I could see Ethan's face, wanting to capture his joy when he opened his gifts. Chloe began the distribution process with theatrical flair, reading each child's name dramatically before handing over beautifully wrapped packages. Our first present goes to our birthday girl from last month, Miss Lily Thompson. Lily squealed as she unwrapped an expensive art easel with a full set of professional paints and brushes. "Oh my gosh, Mom, this is exactly what I wanted." Mason was next, tearing into his gift to reveal a remote-control drone that immediately had all the adults stepping back as he started examining its features. Grace got a deluxe princess costume collection that made her gasp with delight and immediately start planning which dress to try first. The twins received matching mountain bikes that had Frank and Owen already discussing where to set up a practice course in the backyard. With each gift opened, my excitement grew. The children were having exactly the kind of magical Christmas morning that I'd envisioned. Ethan watched each unwrapping with genuine interest, smiling at his cousin's excitement, even helping Grace untangle some ribbon when she got frustrated with her package. But then something started to feel wrong. Chloe kept reaching into the pile of presents, but somehow Ethan's name never came up. I watched her carefully, waiting for her to call his name, to hand him one of the several gifts I assumed were mixed in with the others. The pile was getting smaller and a cold dread started settling in my stomach. Ethan Rodriguez Thompson. I kept waiting to hear, but instead Chloe called out names for second gifts, then third gifts. Some children were getting multiple presents while my son sat empty-handed, still smiling politely at everyone else's joy, but I could see the confusion starting to creep into his expression. Blake seemed oblivious, laughing at Mason's attempts to control his drone and taking pictures of Grace's impromptu fashion show. Frank and Diane were busy admiring their grandchildren's gifts, and Owen was helping the twins figure out how to adjust their bike seats. The pile of presents dwindled to nothing, and Ethan remained exactly as he'd started, empty-handed, patient, waiting for his turn that apparently wasn't coming. The other children were already playing with their new toys, their attention completely absorbed in their Christmas bounty. My heart was pounding as I approached Chloe, who was busy collecting wrapping paper and organizing the chaos. "Chloe," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady, "where are Ethan's presents?" She looked up at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion for a moment, then glanced over at Ethan sitting alone while the other children played around him. Her expression shifted to something that looked almost like embarrassment, but then she shrugged with that same sweet smile she always wore. "Oh, we ran out," she said, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "I guess we miscounted this year. Sorry, Ethan." The room went silent. Every conversation stopped. Every adult turned to look at my son, who was sitting perfectly still, his hands still folded in his lap, his face carefully neutral in that way children learn when they're trying not to cry in front of people. The silence in that room was deafening. I felt like I was drowning in humiliation and rage, my face burning hot while my hands went ice cold. Every instinct I had as a mother was screaming at me to grab Ethan and storm out of that house, to protect him from these people who could be so casually cruel to a child. But I also knew that making a scene would only make things worse for him, would turn him into the center of a family drama that he didn't deserve. I looked at Blake, waiting for him to say something, anything, to defend his stepson. But Blake was staring at his sister with his mouth slightly open, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. His face was pale, and I could see the internal struggle playing out in his expression. But he remained frozen, caught between his loyalty to his family and his responsibility to ours. Frank cleared his throat uncomfortably and busied himself adjusting his camera settings. Diane had suddenly become very interested in folding wrapping paper with unnecessary precision. Owen was looking back and forth between Chloe and Ethan with obvious discomfort, but like his brother, he seemed paralyzed by the awkwardness of the moment. The children, meanwhile, had stopped playing with their new toys and were staring at Ethan with the kind of confused concern that kids get when they sense something is very wrong, but don't understand what. Lily was holding her new paintbrush in mid-air, her excitement completely deflated. Mason had put down his drone controller and was looking at his mother with a furrowed brow that suggested even a 7-year-old could see the unfairness of the situation. But it was Ethan's reaction that broke my heart and amazed me at the same time. He didn't cry, he didn't get angry, he didn't even look particularly surprised. Instead, he nodded once, very seriously, and said in a clear, steady voice, "It's okay, Mom." "I understand." Those words hit me like a punch to the chest. He understood. My 8-year-old son understood that he had been deliberately excluded, that this wasn't an oversight or a mistake, but a choice. And he was handling it with more grace and dignity than any of the adults in that room. I was about to say something, probably something that would have ruined Christmas and damaged relationships beyond repair, when Ethan suddenly stood up, not dramatically, not in anger, but with the same quiet purpose he showed when he was concentrating on a difficult homework problem or building something complex with his Legos. He walked calmly across the room to where his backpack sat by the front door. I watched, confused, as he unzipped it and reached inside. I had no idea what he was doing. We had brought our gifts in shopping bags, and I hadn't seen him pack anything special in his backpack. He usually just carried his book and maybe a small toy for the car ride, but then he pulled out a small box, wrapped in simple brown paper with a red ribbon tied around it. The wrapping was clearly his own work, not perfectly aligned like the professional gift wrapping I'd paid for, but careful and neat in the way that showed real effort. Where had this come from? When had he wrapped it? How had I missed him preparing a gift? He walked back toward the circle with that wrapped box in his hands, and something about his posture had changed. There was a determination in his movements that I'd never seen before, a quiet confidence that seemed to fill the space around him. The room was still silent, but now it felt like everyone was holding their breath, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Ethan stopped directly in front of Chloe, who was still kneeling on the floor surrounded by discarded wrapping paper and ribbons. He held out the small box to her with both hands, like he was presenting something precious and important. "I have something for you, Aunt Chloe," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent room. There was no hurt in his tone, no anger, no accusation, just a simple statement of fact delivered with the kind of sincerity that only children possess. Chloe looked genuinely shocked. Her eyes darted from the box to Ethan's face to the assembled family members who were all watching this unexpected turn of events. She reached out and took the box hesitantly, her hands noticeably less steady than they had been when she was confidently distributing gifts just minutes earlier. "Ethan, you didn't need to get me anything," she said, but her voice had lost that theatrical quality it had carried during the gift-opening ceremony. She sounded uncertain now, maybe even a little scared. Ethan didn't respond to her words. He just stood there, waiting, watching her face with those observant eyes that seemed to see everything. And somehow, in that moment, I knew that whatever was in that box was going to change everything. Chloe's hands trembled slightly as she untied the red ribbon with deliberate care, as if she sensed that whatever was inside this simple brown package would be significant. The entire room watched in complete silence. Even the younger children had stopped fidgeting, somehow understanding that this was an important moment. She peeled back the brown paper to reveal a small white jewelry box, the kind you might find at any department store. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, but chosen with obvious thought. Chloe glanced up at Ethan, who stood perfectly still, his hands now clasped behind his back, waiting with the patience of someone much older than 8. When she opened the box, I heard her sharp intake of breath. Inside was a simple silver bracelet with a single charm attached, a heart with the word family engraved across it in delicate script. But there was something else in the box, a piece of paper folded small and tucked beneath the bracelet. Chloe lifted out the bracelet first, holding it up to the light, and I could see her eyes starting to fill with tears. Then she unfolded the paper, and as she read, her face went through a transformation that I'll never forget. Confusion gave way to shock, shock to understanding, and understanding to something that looked like pure shame. Her hands began to shake more noticeably, and the paper rattled softly as she held it. Blake leaned forward, trying to see what was written on the note, but Chloe clutched it against her chest. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But Ethan wasn't finished. He stepped closer to her, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room with startling clarity. "I wrote that letter 3 weeks ago," he said, looking directly at Chloe with those wise eyes that had always seen too much. "After I heard you talking to Uncle Owen in the kitchen at Thanksgiving. You said you hoped Mom and I wouldn't ruin another family Christmas like we did last year." The room seemed to freeze. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Frank set down his coffee cup with a sharp clink. Owen's face went pale as he stared at his sister with obvious horror. Ethan continued, his voice steady and matter-of-fact without any trace of hurt or anger. I wanted you to know that I understand you don't think we belong here, but Mom loves Uncle Blake, and he makes her happy in a way I've never seen before. I thought maybe if I gave you something that said family on it, you might remember that families are supposed to take care of each other, especially at Christmas. Blake finally found his voice. Chloe, what is he talking about? What did you say to him? But Chloe was staring at the letter in her hands, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. She looked up at Ethan with an expression of complete devastation. Read it out loud, Lily said suddenly, her 9-year-old voice cutting through the tension. What does the letter say? Chloe's voice cracked as she began to read Ethan's careful handwriting. Dear Aunt Chloe, I know you don't like me and Mom very much. I heard you say we don't really belong in your family. I wanted to give you this so you would remember that being family means being kind to each other, especially at Christmas. I hope someday you'll want us to stay. Love, Ethan. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't the uncomfortable quiet of an awkward situation. This was the profound silence of people confronting an ugly truth about themselves. It was Lily who broke it first. Mom, she said, her voice small and confused. Why didn't Tyler get any presents? That's not fair. Mason nodded vigorously. Yeah, that's mean. We're supposed to share. Owen stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger as he looked at his sister. Chloe, how could you do this? He's 8 years old. He's family. Frank's voice was quiet but firm when he spoke. Chloe Marie Thompson, you owe this child and his mother an apology. This is not how we raised you. But it was Blake's reaction that surprised me most. My conflict-avoidant husband, who had spent 2 years tiptoeing around his family's dynamics, suddenly found his voice and his backbone. Chloe, he said, standing up and moving to put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. What you did was cruel and unacceptable. Ethan is my son now. Maya is my wife. They are my family, and if you can't accept that, then we won't be coming to family events anymore. The weight of those words settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Chloe looked around at her family members, seeing disappointment and disapproval on every face, even her own children's. She looked down at the bracelet in her hand, then back at Ethan, who was still standing there with quiet dignity, waiting to see what would happen next. And then, something beautiful and unexpected began to unfold. Chloe's breakdown wasn't pretty or delicate. It was the kind of sobbing that comes from deep, genuine shame, the messy, ugly crying that happens when you finally see yourself clearly and don't like what you find. She clutched Ethan's letter to her chest and looked at him through her tears. I'm so sorry, she choked out. You're absolutely right. I was mean and selfish and jealous, and you didn't deserve any of that. None of this was your fault. But what happened next was something none of us expected. Instead of waiting for more apologies or explanations, Lily immediately got up from her spot in the circle. She walked over to her pile of new gifts, picked up the expensive art set that had made her so excited just minutes before, and brought it directly to Ethan. You can have this, she said simply, setting it down in front of him. We should share at Christmas. That's what families do. Her gesture broke something open in the other children. Mason jumped up and grabbed his remote control drone. Here, Ethan, want to try this? It's really cool and I can teach you how to fly it. Grace, not to be outdone by her older siblings, dragged over her entire princess costume collection. We can play dress-up together. You can be the prince or the dragon or whatever you want. Even the 6-year-old twins, Noah and Liam, started offering their new superhero costumes. You can be a superhero with us, Noah said seriously. We need more good guys anyway. Owen looked at his sister with a mixture of disappointment and sadness. Chloe, that was cruel. I'm ashamed of you right now. This boy showed more maturity and grace in the last 10 minutes than you've shown in 2 years. Frank stood up slowly, his camera forgotten. From now on, your mother and I will handle Christmas gifts. Every child in this family will be included. No exceptions. Chloe, you clearly can't be trusted with this responsibility. Diane, who had been silent through most of the drama, walked over to Ethan and knelt down to his level. Sweetheart, I am so sorry. You should never have been treated that way in our home. You are our grandson and we love you. But the moment that truly changed everything was when Chloe held up the bracelet with shaking hands. Ethan, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, would you help me put this on? I want to wear it always to remember what you taught me today. Ethan stepped forward without hesitation and carefully fastened the clasp around her wrist. "It's okay, Aunt Chloe," he said quietly. "Everyone makes mistakes. Mom taught me that what matters is what you do after you realize you were wrong." Chloe looked at the bracelet on her wrist, then at Maya. "I was jealous," she admitted. "Blake was my little brother, and I thought I was protecting our family, but I was really just being scared and small-minded. You and Ethan don't just belong here. You make our family better. I can see that now." She turned back to Ethan. "Would you let me take you shopping this week? I want you to pick out presents that you actually want, and I want to learn what you like. I want to be the kind of aunt who deserves that bracelet." Blake, who had been watching everything with tears in his eyes, pulled both Maya and Ethan into a tight hug. "I'm sorry I didn't stand up for you sooner," he whispered to both of them. "That stops today. We're a family, all of us, and anyone who can't accept that doesn't deserve to be in our lives." The rest of Christmas morning transformed into something magical in a completely different way than anyone had planned. The children spent hours teaching Ethan how to use all their new toys, creating elaborate games that included everyone. Frank and Diane made a point of asking Ethan about his interests, his school, his favorite subjects. Owen started planning a camping trip for all the cousins, making sure to ask Ethan specifically what outdoor activities he might enjoy. But it was Chloe's transformation that was most remarkable. She spent the rest of the day actively including Ethan in every conversation, asking his opinions, laughing at his jokes, treating him exactly like she treated her own children. The bracelet never left her wrist. As Maya reflected later, watching her son help his younger cousins build a fort out of wrapping paper and ribbon, she realized that Ethan had accomplished something she never could have. He had shown an entire family who they really were. Not through anger or confrontation, but through quiet dignity, unexpected generosity, and a wisdom that put every adult in that room to shame. That 8-year-old boy taught everyone what family really means. Not shared DNA or matching last names, but choosing every day to love, include, and protect each other. Sometimes the smallest person in the room has the biggest heart, and sometimes the most painful moments become the ones that save us all.